Hey everyone, ready to unlock your inner master. Today's deep dive takes us into Robert Greene's mastery. You know Greene, he's known for insightful works like The 48 Laws of Power, but mastery hits different. It's about that journey we all crave, that path to becoming really good at something we love. And Greene's take is, it's not about some predetermined genius gene.
Exactly. What's refreshing about Green's approach is that he takes this concept of mastery, which, let's face it, can feel pretty intimidating, and breaks it down into a journey achievable by anyone, regardless of background. He focuses on dedication, strategy, and a willingness to put in the work, drawing on the lives of iconic figures from Mozart to Einstein, not to make us feel inadequate, but to illustrate the universal principles at play.
Okay, so let's dive into these principles.
Huh.
Greene starts with this idea of the original mind, that childlike curiosity and openness we see in children. That pure, uninhibited excitement for exploring and questioning everything. He argues that masters, in a way, hold on to that.
It's about retaining that childlike enthusiasm, that drive to explore and question without the constraints of self-doubt or preconceived notions that we tend to develop as we grow older.
He illustrates this with a great anecdote about a young Ingmar Bergman. The legendary filmmaker Bergman was gifted a cinematograph,
Yeah.
basically an early movie projector, and he becomes obsessed. He traded away all his other toys for it.
Imagine being so captivated by something that you'd trade away everything else. That's the original mind in action, that innate drive Green's talking about, that pull towards a specific field. And he argues that cultivating this, nurturing that drive is essential throughout the journey to mastery. It's not a one-time thing. It's about constantly reconnecting with that inner spark.
So we've established the importance of nurturing that original mind. But how do we actually begin the journey? That's where Greene's concept of the apprenticeship comes in.
Yeah.
But it's not your typical follow the rules kind of apprenticeship.
Exactly. When we think of apprenticeships, we often think of blindly following a mentor's instructions. But Greene challenges that notion. He posits that true apprenticeship isn't about blind obedience. It's about active observation, soaking up knowledge like a sponge, and strategically pushing back, questioning and solidifying learning through resistance.
He brings up John Keats, the poet, who essentially put himself through an intense self-apprenticeship. Keats would rewrite passages from classic literature, experimenting with different words, different rhythms, really pushing himself past his comfort zone, even enduring harsh criticism to hone his craft.
And that's a key takeaway here, strategic resistance. Even seeking out challenges and embracing failure as a learning experience can be more valuable than simply following instructions. The most valuable mentors don't just want followers. They want you to engage, question, and even disagree at times. That's where real growth happens. It's about deliberate practice, seeking out challenges, even embracing failure as a crucial learning tool.
Now, this idea of pushing back and navigating different perspectives really resonates with Greene's emphasis on what he calls social intelligence, which, and I love how he frames this, is not just about being likable or charming, it's about something much deeper.
You're right. He dives into the importance of understanding people's motivations, the often unspoken dynamics at play in any social environment. Whether it's a workshop, a design studio, or a writer's group, it's about reading between the lines and understanding the subtle cues that drive human interaction.
And he illustrates this with a fantastic anecdote about a young Benjamin Franklin. Franklin, full of himself, heads to London with promises from a supposed patron who basically ghosts him. He's left high and dry.
And this experience, though harsh, became a turning point for Franklin. It forced him to hone his people-reading skills, to see through flattery, to observe actions over words, to recognize those masks we all wear, especially in professional settings. This wasn't about becoming cynical. It was about developing a keen awareness of social dynamics.
Now, this story about Franklin really resonated with me. It reminds me of a time when I was starting out as a writer. I had this piece I was really proud of, sent it off to a magazine. And the editor, well, let's just say I was pretty naive about how these things worked.
Yeah.
It took me a while to realize that feedback in the creative world, it's not always sugar-coated.
That makes me think of Green's point about how social intelligence isn't just about being liked, right? It's
Yeah.
about understanding those unspoken rules of the game, the dynamics, the motivations. It's almost like you need a strategy for navigating those relationships.
Totally. And that's something Greene emphasizes throughout the book, this idea of strategy. It's not enough to just be passionate or talented. You've got to be intentional about how you approach your growth, your craft.
It's about making deliberate choices.
Right.
Like even in that example you shared, learning how to handle feedback, even harsh feedback, that's part of honing your social intelligence in that specific field.
Absolutely. And that leads us to one of the things I found most fascinating in Mastery Greene's exploration of how intuition and rational thinking work together. We often hear about this left brain versus right brain thing. But Greene challenges that, doesn't he?
He does. He argues it's not about one dominating the other, but about finding that sweet spot where they work in harmony, where they enhance each other.
It's like he's saying that true mastery requires both the logic, the analytical thinking, and that gut feeling, that intuitive spark.
And he uses Leonardo da Vinci as a prime example, talking about how da Vinci was obsessed with detail, the veins in a hand, the way light hits a surface, the curve of a lip. He studied it all meticulously. This might seem purely technical, but Greene argues that it fed da Vinci's intuition.
So it's like, by observing so closely, by being so detail-oriented, da Vinci was actually training his intuition, his eye, for what worked, what felt right.
Yeah, it's like how a chef can just feel when a dish needs a pinch more salt, or a musician knows instinctively when to deviate slightly from the sheet music. They've trained their intuition through years of practice and observation, combined with that understanding of the technical elements.
Which is interesting because we often think of intuition as this magical, almost unexplainable thing. But Greene seems to suggest that we can cultivate it, that we can actually develop it through deliberate practice and deep immersion in our field.
Exactly. It's about training our minds and bodies to respond intuitively based on a deep well of knowledge and experience. It's like building a mental database that our intuition can then draw on.
It reminds me of something you said earlier about Greene's approach being refreshing. Because he takes this concept of mastery, which can feel so daunting, and breaks it down into these achievable steps.
It's about demystifying the process, right? Showing that it's not about some innate genius or talent, but about dedication, strategy, and a willingness to put in the work to embrace the journey with all its challenges and setbacks.
Because let's face it, the path to mastery isn't always smooth sailing. There are bumps along the way. And Greene doesn't shy away from that, does he?
Not at all. He dedicates a whole section to identifying those common internal roadblocks, the pitfalls that can trip us up on our journey. And what I appreciate is that he presents these pitfalls not as insurmountable obstacles, but as opportunities for growth.
Like those times when we get impatient, wanting to rush the process, skip steps, thinking we can shortcut our way to mastery.
Or, on the flip side, when we get a taste of success and let our egos get inflated, thinking we've somehow arrived, that we've got it all figured out.
It's like we hit that plateau, and suddenly the learning stops, the growth stagnates, and we wonder why we're not progressing anymore.
It's so easy to fall into those traps, right? And Greene highlights another big one, clinging to a rigid, overly technical approach. We can get so caught up in the mechanics, the rules, that we lose sight of the bigger picture, that sense of playfulness and experimentation that's so crucial for growth.
And that reminds me of the story Greene tells about Temple Grandin. She had to overcome so much to achieve mastery in her field.
Her story is so inspiring. Initially dismissed and misunderstood because of her autism, she could have easily given up. But instead, she leaned into her unique way of thinking, her different perspective, and it became her greatest strength.
It really challenges our assumptions about what it takes to achieve mastery, doesn't it? It's not about fitting into some predetermined mold. It's about recognizing our own strengths, even those that others might see as weaknesses, and leveraging them to our advantage.
And that's where self-awareness becomes so crucial, right? Greene emphasizes this throughout the book, the importance of understanding our own tendencies, our strengths and weaknesses, those internal patterns that can either propel us forward or hold us back.
So it's not enough to just read about mastery, to understand these principles intellectually. We have to be willing to turn that mirror inward, to really examine our own habits, our thought patterns, our behaviors, and to be honest with ourselves about what we find.
It's about asking ourselves those tough questions. Am I being honest with myself about my motivations? Am I letting fear hold me back? Am I clinging to old habits that no longer serve me? That kind of self-reflection can be uncomfortable, but it's essential for growth.
It's about holding ourselves accountable, right? Because ultimately, we're the ones responsible for our own journey.
And that brings us back to the heart of Greene's message. Mastery is an ongoing journey, a process of continual learning, refinement, and self-discovery. It's not about achieving some fixed endpoint, but about embracing the journey itself with all its challenges and triumphs.
It's about finding joy in the process, the continual striving, the pushing of our own boundaries, and recognizing that the true reward of mastery lies not in some external validation, but in the transformation we undergo along the way.
You know, as we've been talking about these principles, it strikes me how they're not just relevant to achieving mastery in a specific field. They're really about living a more fulfilling and meaningful life in general.
Absolutely. It's about approaching everything we do with that same level of dedication, curiosity, and intentionality. Whether we're artists, entrepreneurs, parents, or simply striving to be better versions of ourselves, these principles can guide us. So as we wrap up this deep dive into mastery, I hope you're walking away feeling inspired and empowered. Because the path to mastery is open to all of us. It starts with that first step, that decision to commit to the journey, and to remember that it's not about perfection, but about progress, resilience, and a willingness to never stop learning.
And who knows, maybe along the way we'll even discover hidden talents and passions we never knew we had. The journey of mastery is full of surprises.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep striving, and most importantly, never stop unlocking your own inner master.